The contemporary geopolitical landscape is characterized by a complex web of strategies employed by various global actors to undermine and dominate powerful nations, particularly those with historical roots in white Western societies. These strategies encompass overt, covert, and subversive approaches, often deployed simultaneously to erode sovereignty, extract resources, and shift control over key institutions. At the heart of this dynamic lies the United States, viewed as a primary target due to its economic wealth, military prowess, and cultural influence, with similar patterns extending to other white Western countries. The orchestration of these efforts involves alliances among financial elites, international forums, and ethnic networks, all competing yet cooperating to achieve dominance without direct confrontation. Historical precedents underscore the persistence of such conflicts, where smaller factions or external powers have sought to conquer or infiltrate larger entities through multifaceted tactics. In the American context, these manifest through political figures who serve as conduits for globalist agendas, channeling influences that prioritize international interests over national ones. For instance, manufactured political personalities rise with unprecedented support from banking cartels and investment firms, embedding policies that facilitate economic dependency and cultural shifts. This framework reveals a network of complexity, where friendly and confrontational forces intersect, perpetuating attacks on foundational structures. Critically, these strategies extend beyond politics to encompass demographic manipulations and resource grabs, positioning white populations as focal points of erosion. The ultimate aim is control over military assets developed within targeted nations, achieved through internal subversion rather than external aggression. This perpetual state of targeting demands constant vigilance, as historical cycles of conflict demonstrate that disparities in wealth and power invariably attract efforts to redistribute or seize them. In white Western societies, this translates to ongoing pressures that transform demographics and institutions, ensuring no period of respite from adversarial maneuvers. Presidential exemplars of strategic infiltration. The presidencies of Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump serve as clear exemplars of how globalist interests adapt their infiltration strategies to exploit different political environments within the United States. Obama's administration embodies the covert mode of operation, where influence is exerted through hidden networks and carefully orchestrated support structures rather than overt declarations. As a figure who rose rapidly from relative obscurity, a state senator with limited national exposure, he benefited from an extraordinary convergence of endorsements and funding from global banking cartels, major investment firms, and elite international circles. This ascent followed a remarkably efficient trajectory, marked by unprecedented financial backing, media amplification, and alignment with transnational agendas that emphasized multilateral cooperation over unilateral American priorities. Policies such as participation in the Paris Climate Accord and pursuit of expansive trade frameworks like the Trans-Pacific Partnership reflected a subtle prioritization of global integration, often at the expense of domestic industrial and sovereignty concerns. This covert approach relied on manufacturing a political persona that appeared organic and grassroots while being sustained by powerful behind-the-scenes alliances. The rapid elevation of Obama demonstrated how global elites could identify and propel a candidate who would advance their objectives without drawing immediate suspicion of external orchestration. His administration's emphasis on international institutions and progressive frameworks facilitated deeper embedding of globalist priorities into American governance, creating pathways for long-term influence that extended beyond his tenure. Such strategies thrive in environments where public perception can be shaped to view the candidate as an outsider reformer, masking the extent of elite coordination that enabled his rise and sustained his policy direction. Joe Biden's presidency, in contrast, illustrates the subversive dimension of these infiltration efforts, where actions contradict stated intentions while leveraging established power structures to advance hidden agendas. Long a fixture in Washington politics, Biden maintained visible ties to radical progressive elements, entrenched democratic networks, and global financial institutions, allowing for a surface-level appearance of continuity while pursuing policies that eroded national boundaries and economic independence. Family business connections involving foreign entities, combined with widespread criticisms of corruption and influence peddling, underscored a pattern of public rhetoric emphasizing unity and stability while enacting measures that weakened border security, expanded federal overreach, and aligned with international economic priorities. This duality enabled the advancement of agendas that drained national resources through prolonged foreign engagements and domestic redistribution schemes. Subversion in this context operates through deception that exploits institutional trust and media complicity, permitting power holders to implement transformative changes under the guise of routine governance. Biden's tenure saw executive actions and legislative efforts that reversed previous policies on energy independence, immigration enforcement, and fiscal restraint, all while maintaining alliances with entities that benefited from American decline. The approach capitalized on the predictability of long-serving politicians, whose established networks provided cover for maneuvers that prioritized globalist stability over American primacy. By operating within the open framework of partisan politics, this strategy ensured that destructive outcomes appeared as mere policy disagreements rather than coordinated assaults on sovereignty. Donald Trump's presidency represents the overt facet of globalist infiltration, characterized by transparent alliances, direct donor influence, and unapologetic policy moves that nonetheless intersect with broader transnational objectives. Unlike the concealed support structures of prior administrations, Trump's connections to corporate donors, military-industrial stakeholders, and select international leaders were conducted in plain view, often amplified through public rallies, social media declarations, and high-profile appointments. Actions such as renegotiating trade agreements, relocating diplomatic assets to align with certain foreign priorities, and increasing defense expenditures reflected a style that avoided heavy concealment, allowing observers to see the sources of input and direction more clearly. While presented as nationalist and America first, many of these initiatives maintained compatibility with global economic frameworks and elite interests. This overt quality does not diminish the infiltration dynamic, but rather adapts it to a leadership model that thrives on visibility and confrontation. Trump's approach permitted global forces to engage directly through visible channels, donor networks, advisory circles, and policy intersections, while fostering divisions that distracted from deeper structural erosions. The lack of heavy obfuscation in alliances and decision-making processes made the strategy more resilient to accusations of hidden manipulation, as influences could be framed as legitimate political support. Across these three presidencies, the adaptability of globalist forces becomes evident. Each exploits the unique characteristics of the leader to maintain continuous pressure on American autonomy, demonstrating a sophisticated orchestration that shifts tactics without altering the ultimate objective of control. Expanded strategies of global adversaries. In addition to the foundational modes of overt, covert, and subversive infiltration, global adversaries deploy a broader arsenal of methods designed to weaken the United States and similar Western nations from multiple angles simultaneously. Economic coercion stands as one of the most sustained and effective approaches, involving deliberate financial sabotage through mechanisms such as massive debt holdings, engineered trade imbalances, and the construction of alternative international systems. Entities within blocs like BRICS actively promote parallel financial architectures that circumvent U.S.-controlled institutions, enabling sanctions evasion, currency diversification, and resource dominance that gradually diminishes American fiscal leverage. This long-term exploitation of economic dependencies generates inflation, manufacturing hollowing, and strategic vulnerabilities that shift the balance of global power without requiring kinetic conflict. The economic dimension extends to targeted accumulation of U.S. assets and debt instruments, creating leverage points that can be activated during crises to influence policy decisions. By fostering reliance on foreign supply chains for critical materials and technologies, adversaries ensure that any disruption carries disproportionate consequences for American stability. This strategy operates on a generational timescale, gradually eroding the financial foundations that have underpinned U.S. dominance while competitors build independent capacity. The cumulative effect transforms economic interdependence into a weapon, where dependency becomes the primary mechanism for extracting wealth and constraining independent action. Informational and disinformation campaigns represent another layer of attack, focused on psychological and perceptual manipulation to fracture social cohesion and institutional legitimacy. Through coordinated propaganda, bot amplification networks, and state-supported media outlets, these efforts flood public discourse with narratives that exploit existing divisions on elections, cultural identity, and national priorities. By amplifying polarization and conspiracy frameworks, adversaries erode collective trust in governing structures, making populations more susceptible to external influence and internal paralysis. Such operations thrive in open information environments, turning freedom of expression into a vulnerability that can be weaponized against the host society. These informational assaults integrate with cyber and digital disruptions, which target the technological backbone of modern infrastructure. Asymmetric attacks, including hacking industrial controls, deploying ransomware against essential services, and compromising communication networks, create widespread disruption while maintaining plausible deniability. The objective is to impose economic costs, undermine confidence in digital systems, and force resource allocation toward defensive measures rather than proactive strength. When combined with cultural infiltration through educational institutions, entertainment media, and non-governmental organizations, these efforts promote ideological shifts that normalize demographic transformation and weaken traditional national allegiances. Hybrid and proxy operations complete this expanded toolkit, blending espionage, support for non-state actors, and regional alliances to achieve strategic goals indirectly. By funding proxies, facilitating paramilitary activities, and cultivating influence networks within target societies, adversaries drain American resources through prolonged engagements while avoiding direct accountability. Domestic populations become operational theaters in this framework, with electoral processes, social movements, and institutional access treated as avenues for long-term positioning. Together, these strategies form an intricate network where competing factions pursue overlapping objectives, ensuring relentless pressure on wealth, territory, and institutional control from within the targeted nations. Influences from ethnic and national networks. Jewish, Zionist, and Israeli factions deploy a range of overt, covert, and subversive strategies to exert influence over U.S. policy and institutions, forming a critical component of broader global efforts to target American sovereignty. Overt approaches are prominently visible through organized lobbying entities such as AIPAC, which systematically channels substantial financial donations and political endorsements to ensure that candidates across the political spectrum align with Israeli priorities. These priorities often encompass unconditional military aid, strategic support in regional conflicts, and policies that prioritize Israeli security concerns, frequently at the expense of domestic American interests like economic stability or independent foreign relations. This direct engagement creates a powerful mechanism for shaping legislative outcomes, where elected officials are incentivized to advocate for initiatives that may divert U.S. resources abroad, reinforcing a pattern where national decision-making appears subordinated to external alliances. Extending beyond secular lobbying, these overt strategies also incorporate partnerships with Christian Zionist organizations, which draw on religious and ideological motivations to amplify advocacy efforts. Such collaborations have historically influenced key foreign policy decisions, from embassy relocations to trade agreements, demonstrating how visible networks can embed long-term agendas into the fabric of American governance across multiple presidential administrations, ultimately contributing to a perceived erosion of autonomous national priorities. Covert tactics employed by these factions operate through less transparent networks, particularly in media, intelligence, and elite circles, where influence is wielded to shape public narratives and suppress dissenting voices. Behind-the-scenes control over major media outlets and tech platforms allows for the strategic embedding of pro-Israel perspectives, often framing any criticism as inherently prejudiced to marginalize opposition. Historical connections to influential banking families, rooted in immigrant-founded financial institutions, provide additional layers of covert leverage, enabling manipulations that guide economic policies toward internationalist goals without overt acknowledgement. These hidden operations ensure that policies favoring global agendas, such as expansive foreign aid or involvement in overseas conflicts, advance under the radar, avoiding public scrutiny while consolidating power. In the intelligence realm, alleged ties facilitate information flows that align U.S. strategies with Zionist objectives, creating a web of influence that permeates government agencies and advisory roles. This covert dimension underscores a sophisticated approach to infiltration, where the true extent of manipulation remains obscured, allowing for the gradual realignment of American institutions to serve external interests over time. Subversive elements within these networks exploit themes of dual loyalties and deceptive unity to push forward economic and geopolitical shifts that undermine U.S. cohesion. By promoting policies under the guise of shared values or mutual benefits, such as economic partnerships that in reality favor one-sided advantages, these strategies create internal divisions while advancing hidden objectives. For instance, the conflation of legitimate policy critiques with anti-Semitic accusations serves as a tool to silence debate, effectively subverting open discourse and consolidating control over narrative framing. This approach extends to economic manipulations, where alliances with global financial agencies facilitate corruption scandals or policy flips that erode public trust, all while maintaining a facade of transparency. Across presidencies, subversive tactics have manifested in advisor appointments and family connections that blur lines between national and foreign loyalties, enabling the pursuit of conflicts or wealth redistributions that drain American resources. Ultimately, these methods represent a calculated erosion of sovereignty, where saying one thing publicly while acting otherwise leverages existing power structures to achieve long-term dominance. These influences are deeply interconnected with historical financial entities, tracing origins to immigrant-founded firms that played pivotal roles in building U.S. capitalism yet face critiques for establishing dominance over debt mechanisms and policy directions. Modern iterations of these ties involve linkages to investment giants and private equity firms, reinforcing global cartels that target Western societal cohesion through sustained economic pressures and cultural interventions. This multifaceted engagement positions Jewish, Zionist, and Israeli networks as central actors in wider attacks on America and white Western countries, where infiltration and manipulation serve to extract wealth, alter demographics, and control key institutions. By integrating with other global factions, these networks contribute to a complex ecosystem of competing and allied forces, all aimed at transforming targeted nations from within, perpetuating cycles of conflict and power redistribution that have defined human interactions for centuries. Global economic blocs and demographic pressures. Economic blocs such as BRICS represent formidable anti-U.S. networks, actively challenging American financial and military dominance through a suite of strategies including de-dollarization, resource monopolization, and supply chain weaponization. By promoting trade settlements in local currencies and developing parallel financial systems, these alliances diminish the global reliance on the U.S. dollar, thereby reducing Washington's ability to enforce sanctions and maintain economic leverage. Accumulating vast holdings of U.S. debt allows these blocs to exert subtle pressure, turning America's fiscal dependencies into tools for strategic advantage. Resource control further amplifies this challenge, with efforts to secure critical minerals and energy supplies creating bottlenecks that force U.S. industries into vulnerable positions, exacerbating job losses and inflation. Supply chain manipulations, exposed during global disruptions, highlight how these networks can drain American resources by fostering over-reliance on foreign manufacturing, ultimately shifting economic power eastward and weakening the foundational pillars of U.S. supremacy. Demographic pressures, as detailed in UN reports, position migration as a deliberate mechanism for population replacement in aging societies, particularly those with white majority compositions. Projections emphasize the necessity of massive migrant inflows to sustain workforces and economic productivity in nations facing fertility declines, leading to scenarios where indigenous populations are numerically overshadowed in their ancestral territories. This process, driven by external forces and low native birth rates, facilitates a form of infiltration that alters societal structures, from voting patterns to property ownership, through continuous waves of relocation. UN analyses outline hypothetical requirements for millions of annual migrants to prevent population shrinkage, framing this as an inevitable response to demographic imbalances but effectively enabling shifts that transform cultural identities and power distributions. In white Western countries, this manifests as a factual trajectory toward minority status for native groups, underscoring how migration serves as a tool for long-term societal reconfiguration without overt conflict. These dynamics explicitly target white Western countries, forging alliances among diverse ethnic groups and national entities that compete for control over wealth, institutions, and territory. Migration emerges as a literal invasion strategy, allowing external actors to embed within host societies, gradually seizing economic opportunities and political influence through demographic dominance. This competition among factions, while occasionally confrontational, often aligns in shared goals of extracting resources and manipulating systems, perpetuating historical conflicts where disparities in power invite takeover attempts. By infiltrating voting mechanisms, acquiring property, and influencing cultural norms, these networks aim to commandeer the very foundations of targeted nations, ensuring that control over finance, economics, and military assets falls into their hands over generations. The interplay between economic blocs and demographic pressures creates a synergistic assault, where financial weakening paves the way for population shifts that solidify internal control. As alliances form to evade U.S.-led systems and promote migration policies, the result is a draining of national vitality, with white populations bearing the brunt as their countries are transformed. This ongoing process, rooted in centuries-old patterns of conquest and subversion, demands recognition of the perpetual threats, where no respite exists from efforts to redistribute power and eliminate existing dominances. Conclusion: network of global influences reshaping Western countries today. The array of strategies targeting America and white Western nations reveals a relentless pursuit of dominance by global actors, necessitating unwavering awareness among affected populations. This pursuit manifests through a combination of overt political manipulations, covert financial networks, subversive cultural shifts, and hybrid economic pressures, all designed to erode national sovereignty from within. Historical patterns confirm that wealth disparities inherently invite infiltration, as smaller factions or external powers have consistently sought to seize control over resource-rich territories, employing tactics that evolve with technological and societal changes. In the context of America, these efforts focus on transforming the nation's military might, built through domestic innovation and investment, into a tool controllable by infiltrating entities, thereby avoiding the risks of direct confrontation. White individuals in these societies must recognize their targeted status, not merely as a demographic group but as custodians of inherited wealth and institutional power, requiring them to evaluate alliances and enemies in a landscape marked by perpetual conflict. This recognition extends beyond immediate threats to encompass long-term demographic engineering, where migration serves as a vehicle for altering voting blocks and property ownership, ensuring that control imbalances persist and intensify over generations. Critically, the integration of presidential influences, expanded tactics, ethnic networks, and economic demographic pressures forms a cohesive assault framework that operates on multiple fronts simultaneously. Presidential exemplars demonstrate how globalist agendas are embedded through manufactured candidacies, deceptive policy implementations, and unhidden alliances, each tailored to exploit the unique vulnerabilities of different administrations. Expanded strategies, including economic coercion via debt leverage and parallel financial systems, complement informational campaigns that sow division and cyber operations that disrupt infrastructure, creating a network of complexity where factions both compete for dominance and align against common targets. Ethnic and national networks, particularly those with historical ties to banking cartels and lobbying entities, amplify these efforts by deploying overt endorsements, covert narrative controls, and subversive loyalty exploitations, positioning themselves as pivotal players in the broader erosion of Western cohesion. Economic blocs challenge U.S. dominance through resource monopolization and supply chain manipulations, while demographic pressures facilitate infiltration by necessitating massive migrant inflows to offset population declines, leading to shifts that redefine cultural and political landscapes. This framework ultimately aims at military takeover through internal subversion, transforming nations without the spectacle of open warfare, as adversaries recognize the futility of direct aggression against superior forces. In synthesizing these elements, the trajectory points to transformative shifts that redefine power structures, where the once dominant positions of white Western societies are systematically undermined to redistribute control. As global forces continue their advance, employing simultaneous and multifaceted approaches that include alliances among diverse ethnic groups and international forums, the endurance of these societies hinges on acknowledging the realities of ongoing encroachments. Strategic countermeasures must therefore prioritize awareness of historical cycles, where conflicts over territory and resources have never ceased, demanding adaptive responses that fortify borders, economic independence, and institutional integrity. The perpetual nature of these threats means there is no time for complacency, as external actors, driven by envy of wealth and power, persist in their efforts to extract and dominate, viewing white populations as barriers to their objectives. This critical examination highlights the enduring nature of human conflict, where targeted groups must adapt not only to safeguard their legacies but to reclaim agency in a world of competing factions vying for ultimate control over military, financial, and demographic assets. Vigilance emerges as the imperative response, countering these multifaceted attacks on sovereignty and identity through proactive evaluation of adversarial maneuvers and alliance formations. In white Western countries, this involves understanding that disparities in ownership and control inherently attract external pressures, with strategies evolving from ancient conquests to modern infiltrations that exploit openness and internal divisions. The wake-up call for affected populations underscores the need to view migration not as benign but as a literal mechanism for invasion, enabling long-term goals of seizing economics, finance, and military periods. By recognizing that these dynamics have persisted since the formation of nations and will continue as long as imbalances exist, societies can foster resilience, ensuring that the legacies of innovation and power are not relinquished to competing entities. This ongoing battle, rooted in the fundamental human drive for dominance, positions white individuals and their countries at the center of global rivalries, where adaptation and unyielding defense become essential for survival amid ceaseless adversarial advances.